Tennessee football is on a recruiting heater, and it looks good for the Vols 2025 class. But Tennessee also got a highly ranked quarterback, the highest ranked quarterback, to commit to the class of 2026. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinels, Adam Sparks and John Adams. As everything is coming up big orange on the recruiting trail lately, this looks really good for the future of Josh Heupel's program, particularly at the quarterback position. I want to get to the quarterbacks in a moment, but let's start with what's closer, a little bit closer to the here and now in terms of recruits in the upcoming signing class. So let's start with the 2025 class, where Tennessee is climbing in the rankings. They're up to number 7 in the 24 sports composite rankings for this 2025 class, which if that holds, now granted, still have about 4 months till the early signing period, but if that holds, that would be Josh Heupel's highest rated class yet. Yes, that would mean it's higher rated than the class a couple years ago that included Nico Iamaleava. So Adam, kind of give us an overview of where things stand in this 2025 recruiting and sort of this run Tennessee has been on to get to this number 7 spot in the class rankings.
Yeah, there's a lot more depth to this class. A ton of 4-star guys. Now, there's not a 5-star unless you count George McIntyre, the Brentwood Academy quarterback, as a 5-star. He's been a 5. He dropped to a 4 when he had an injury. I think he'll be back to a 5-star probably during the senior season. But all that being said, this is a class loaded with 4 stars, which is a really good sign, because that they had been a deplete of those for a few years, at least in large numbers. Right now, if you believe the rankings, it's a top 10 class. I think it's going to hold on to that. Could be a top 5 class. The top offensive tackle in the class is gonna commit in not too long. Tennessee is in on him. There's about 2 or 3 other that could up their number of 4-star recruits in this class. So you could see a top 5 class. It's going to be probably a coin flip of where that's going to be, especially with the offensive tackle. I mean, here's the thing is I get asked a lot, like, is this because of NIL? Is this because of Josh Heupel? Is this because they've won to a reasonable degree? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. NIL got Nico here. I mean, I think we can safely say that if there's not NIL money in the amount that they had, Nico's probably playing somewhere else. I mean, he's from California. Maybe they would have been in on him. I just don't think they'd land him. Once you get that piece, then you've got the momentum to get other guys. And Nico coming is sort of the endorsement that this is a program that high-end players should at least have on their top 5 list, especially quarterbacks, and I know we'll get to that. So that's helped them. The fact that things seem to be on an upward trajectory, Josh Heupel took over a program that was in dire straits and got them competitive quickly, and then got them pretty good quickly after that. And so the product has been on the field. And, they just NIL continues to be a card that they can always play. I don't think anymore, especially in this class, that NIL is necessarily beating out other teams. I think NIL is keeping them on the list of these players, top 5, top 3. And that's got their foot in the door. Once their foot has been in the door, then, they've sold Tennessee in the way that Phil Fulmer sold Tennessee, that other coaches have sold Tennessee, that Johnny Major sold Tennessee, which is, hey, come on game day and there's 102,000 people here and this fan base is out of its mind, and there's stuff being built all the time, and you can win, and you're in the SEC, and all those things that have sold Tennessee in the past have sold this class. And there's definitely a window open right now, along with the NIL money, that can get them into the top 5 and maybe keep them there.
I remember, Blake, when Josh Heupel was hired a few years ago, there was a question about his recruiting. He was at UCF, and they did okay, but you're talking mainly about getting 3 stars there. And they thought their talent level probably dropped off a little bit after Scott Frost left. Still won, though. And so that was a question about Josh Heupel. I think what's so significant here, excuse me, is the timing of it, NIL coming into play, Tennessee having its NIL house in order and ready to go, when the gates flung open. I think that plus Josh Heupel's offense kind of got I think Josh Heupel's offense dazzled everybody with how potent it was, even in the SEC. And so that, sure, as Adam said, you had to have the money to get Nico, but you also had the right offense for Nico. He couldn't have found a better offense than what Josh Heupel runs. So all that kind of came together. I just thought the timing was, just was perfect for Tennessee. I wrote a column the other day about what if NIL would have been in play 50 years ago when Johnny Majors came back to Tennessee, had just won a national championship at Pittsburgh and was coming home to Tennessee. I think fans were at an all-time high, optimistic, and they would have been willing to open up their pocketbooks, I think, in that case. But I just think this is going really well for Tennessee right now. They have the momentum and everything's in place to continue to recruit well.
And let me add to that. On the NIL piece of it, Tennessee was more ready than anyone else when NIL came through. They that they had it ready to go. They just had to push the button. A lot of other programs, particularly in the SEC, were a year or 2 years away from catching up. I think that gap has closed over time, and everybody sort of has. Most schools at this level have their NIL in place now, but Tennessee now has the reputation of being stable in NIL. Like, you don't hear any stories of, well, Tennessee promised me this, but I didn't get paid, or I didn't get paid what I thought I was going to, or they didn't come through in some way, or they made false promises. If you go around a number of schools in power conferences and some in the SEC, you'll get at least one or two of those stories. You don't hear those stories of Tennessee. And so they do have a reputation that their NIL stuff is stable. And I think that helps them some in recruiting. On the recruiting piece of coaches like Josh Heupel, I think we can see now, going into his, fourth season, that he did prioritize recruiting and putting together his staff. Rodney Garner, the D-line coach, has a reputation, and it's well-earned, of putting defensive linemen in the NFL. I mean, he's put dozens and dozens in there. So he had a track record that they could sell. So if you're bringing a 5-star edge rusher on the campus, which they have one that they have as a freshman now, that you can say NIL may get him to campus. But then once you get him to campus, you can sell him on all the stuff of the program, and you say, hey, we're going to pay you high-end money, but also Rodney Garner here will get you to the NFL better than anybody else that's recruiting you. Willie Martinez in the same way. Willie Martinez, the secondary coach, has been criticized for the secondary not being up to par during the season. But out of the season, he's a very good recruiter, which is another reason why Josh Heupel has wanted to have him around. Kelsey Pope's first season as a wide receivers coach, Jalen Hyatt, was a Biletnikoff winner. So again, that's one of those things. Get a wide receiver on the campus. They have a 5-star there now, Mike Matthews. Get him on the campus with the NIL and the allure of the program, and then that gets you in the door. And then you have a guy here that put a Biletnikoff winner out there a couple of years ago. So it's just getting people onto campus more. And then once they get them, Josh Heupel does have a staff that's pretty good at getting their hooks into players.
John, you raised an interesting point about Heupel when he was hired. There were really two question marks with Heupel, and one was, could he recruit at the level Tennessee historically recruited at the level necessary to win big in the SEC? And then two was, could he be a both sides of the ball type of coach, or was Tennessee going to have to continually hang its hat on offense, and its defense would be a liability? I think the jury's still out on part two of that. We know Heupel is an offensive mastermind, guru, whatever word you want to use. It always gets thrown around for these coaches. His offensive chops are not in question. His quarterback development chops are not in question. What remains to be seen is, will the defense down the road ever elevate to better than average. We haven't seen that yet. But I'm wondering if we can put to bed the idea of Heupel as maybe a middling recruiter, because up to this point, I think I was still a little on the fence about that that topic as well. I mean, Heupel's best class was a couple years ago. The class with Nico in it finished ranked, I think 10th it was, in 24/7, which sounds really good. But like as you compare that to Jeremy Pruitt and Butch Jones, and I know our listeners are probably cringing right now at the reference of Pruitt and Jones, but those two guys, I mean, they delivered top 10 classes. And so I think I was still waiting to see, like, does Heupel have another gear in recruiting? And I'm not saying it all comes down to him. Your staff plays into that. NIL plays into that. So many things play into it. But we've seen Tennessee in the past be able to sign, top 5, top 8 ranked classes. And Heupel hadn't quite got to that point yet. But if this class finishes, say, top 6 or top 8, do we think we can put the narrative to bed that, Josh Heupel might be, an average recruiter? Would this class be enough to kill off that narrative, or do you think it's already been sufficiently killed off and Heupel's put that to rest?
Well, I think I don't know how much of a better recruiter Josh Heupel is now than he was at UCF or when he was an offensive coordinator at Missouri and Oklahoma. But I do know it's hard to distinguish, as Adam was pointing out. I mean, what contributes more to the successful recruiting? Bottom line, you got to recruit well. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, Josh Heupel doesn't have to have this dazzling Pied Piper personality so charismatic that a recruit finds him irresistible. I don't think that matters much now in the NIL era. I really don't. I think, as Adam pointed out, Tennessee is showing it can pay players. It's showing it can get players to develop, which, i.e., go be ready for the NFL. Those things are so important. They loom largest to me. And Josh Heupel, as Adam pointed out, hiring good recruiters. So I think it's all kind of come together. And so you can say certainly he's a better recruiter maybe than what he was given credit for, because he's organized this recruiting plan. He's formed a staff. He's involved with NIL. He's aware of all that. So all of that's important. So that to me tells me he's a good recruiter and he can get it done in that area, which is so important, obviously, in college football.
Adam, what do you think? Has that reputation left Josh Heupel? Have you seen enough to put him in the good recruiter camp and in this idea that Heupel was a liability as a recruiter, which was the question mark with him coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that Josh Heupel has shown is that he can get quarterbacks. Now, we've already talked about that this class is much deeper than quarterbacks, and they've gotten edge rushers and some wide receivers and all that. They're starting to get offensive linemen now, but it really starts at quarterback. And he has a reputation of being a quarterback guru. That's obvious. Getting Nico was enormous. Hendon Hooker's in the NFL now. Joe Milton's in the NFL now. Now they need to have success in the NFL. Those two guys are Nico for this narrative, this reputation to hold up, I would say. But it all starts at quarterback. And if you can bring in top flight quarterbacks in recruiting, other positions follow. That's happened some with Nico. I think that's happened with their string of quarterbacks now. Recruits. I mean, this is sort of like the 7-on-7 teams that have become real popular now in recruiting, as much as high school football was ever as popular, is that these elite players look at each other and they know where the quarterbacks are going and they know which schools the quarterbacks are considering. And if you're a 5-star quarterback or a high 4-star quarterback and you have Tennessee on your list, other guys at those positions will look at that and say, that's where the kingfish is going, and that's where I'm going to follow. And so that's helped Tennessee build out these classes beyond quarterbacks, but the quarterbacks are what Josh Heupel specializes in.
Well, let's peel back that quarterback conversation further because, as you move past the attention on the 2025 class, Tennessee got some huge news earlier this month when Faizon Brandon, the 5-star quarterback in the 2026 class, he's the number 1 overall ranked prospect in that class, committed to Tennessee. Not just the number 1 quarterback prospect, the number 1 prospect at any position. He committed to Tennessee. Now, important to point out, this is the 2026 class, so about a year and a half away from signing day for that class. He would not be on the camp on the team next season. He'd be on that 2026 team. But already, Tennessee has George McIntyre committed to the 2025 class. As Adam was saying earlier, a high 4-star prospect, previously been ranked as a 5-star, might reclaim that 5-star ranking down the road. He's set to join the team next year, and already in the program, of course, is Nico and Jake Merklinger. So in theory, guys, in theory at least, in 2026, Tennessee could have a quarterback depth chart that includes Nico, Jake Merklinger, George McIntyre, and Faizon Brandon. Now, I say that in theory. There's a strong chance that Nico could be in the NFL by then, or someone may have transferred out of the program by then. But how much is a crowd, Adam, as you start to look at this recruiting? I mean, it's a good problem to have. I don't think there's any program out there that says, no, we don't want to be signing high 4-stars or 5-star prospects. But we know how quarterback rooms operate, especially in the portal era. You get a lot of talented guys in the program at the same time. Oftentimes that means someone's the odd man out and heads for the portal.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of elements to consider here. Number one, quarterbacks can be more mobile now in their careers, going from school to school, than they could in the past. There's obviously a good market NIL-wise for high-end quarterbacks coming out of high school. There's a much more lucrative market in the transfer portal. If you're a quarterback that can potentially start at a program, even if you haven't proved it already, if you can start, then you're going to get money above your value usually in the portal. So these guys know, I think they're starting to be more aware of this, that you can go to a school, be there for a year or two. If it doesn't work out, you can go to a slightly lesser program and probably get overpaid. We've seen that across college football the last 3 years. So you're not really just like giving up all hope if you go to a place where you may not win the job. That's number one. Number two, all these top flight quarterbacks sort of have their own narrative of how they're going to take over the starting position at Tennessee. We saw this with Georgia for a number of years where, they would get like 5 stars 3 years in a row. And you're thinking, why is that guy going there? They already have their starter. Let's look at it like this. Jake Merklinger right now is a freshman. He's a 4-star player. I'm sure he's telling himself, Nico's got the job for these next 2 seasons. Then he'll go to the NFL. I have a 1-year jump on George McIntyre. He and I are about the same level player. I'll know the system better than he does. So I'll get the job probably like my redshirt sophomore year. And it's my job for 3 years. I'm Tennessee starting quarterback for 3 seasons. George McIntyre probably has the narrative of, I'll get in there. I'm a better player, a better prospect than Merklinger. So I'll get in there. I'll wait a year, and then Nico leaves, and I get the job. It's the same thing Nico did. He comes in, learns position 1 year. George McIntyre can just do the same thing that Nico did. He gets the job. Then as a redshirt freshman, it's his job from that point. He's got a 1-year jump on Faizon Brandon. Faizon Brandon can look at it and say, I'm the best in the country in my class, so I'm Nico 2.0. So whoever's there, McIntyre, Merklinger, whoever, I'll get in there and take the job from them. It may be immediate. It may be a year later once they see that I'm better than those guys. But I'm the guy, and I can beat those 2 guys. Now, is any of that true? Some of it is, some of it isn't, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that these guys, I think, tell themselves that, and any ultra competitive athlete in that way can sell that narrative to themselves. Eventually, reality hits you, and you find out some of those are not true. Taven Jackson was a very good 4-star recruit here, and Nico got to campus. He read the tea leaves, and he could figure out that Nico was going to be the starter, and Nico was probably already ahead of him. And he jumped in the portal, went to Indiana, and that's probably going to happen to one of these guys that we just named. Which one? Well, we'll see. But I think all those guys know that they can either win the job, or if they don't win the job, the option is always there to jump in the portal and, go make money somewhere else and probably have a better chance of starting.
I think that scenario, it's well put. These quarterbacks should have consulted with Adam before they made their decision. And Adam is a former high school quarterback. I don't know how many stars he had by his name, but he did play quarterback. I go back to, it doesn't always play out the way we think it will, because sometimes some of these guys are better, turn out to be better, sometimes not as good. But go back how it played out recently. Tennessee has Joe Milton, the starter. Nico comes in. Taven Jackson was already here. He's a 4-star, but nobody thought he'd be as good as Nico, and he was. And he went to Indiana, started initially, but then lost his starting job to someone else. So I think there's a tendency to say that's who Jake Merklinger is, that he's that player, the 4-star, not as heralded as George McIntyre, but acclaimed nonetheless. And that he may look at it as next year, if he falls behind a freshman, then certainly he would transfer. However, we don't know. You can't always be sure about that. I'm sure there are a lot of situations where the guy that's not as heralded, that doesn't even have as many stars or as high a ranking in the 24/7 composite, but he ends up winning the job. But when I look at this situation, it's probably about next year could be about as good as it gets. If you could have 3, 4, or 5-star quarterbacks on your roster, no matter how it ends up playing out in today's era, transfer portal, NIL, that might be about as good as it gets. I mean, Georgia's kind of the prototype for that. It kept 4 stars around. Finally, Vandegrift transferred to Kentucky, and he's supposed to start there. Brock Vandegrift, who I think might have been a 5-star coming out of high school. So that, to me, is about as good as you can hope for in this era, and that's a tribute to Tennessee and Josh Heupel.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. You look ahead to 2025, the depth chart. I mean, I think it's very plausible Nico could be coming back as a starter in 2025, and then you'd have Merklinger in his second year in the program, kind of itching to get his chance maybe in 2026, and then you'd have McIntyre in his first year in the program. That would be probably as deep of a quarterback room as Tennessee's had during Heupel's tenure. Now, my prediction would be that by the time 2026 arrives, either Merklinger or McIntyre would transfer out of the program. I mean, I think, as Adam put it, Taven Jackson saw the tea leaves after Nico came in. I think that 2025 season will be kind of telling, if that is Nico's final season before he goes to the NFL. I think Merklinger and McIntyre are going to try to determine that year who is set up to be the heir, because you would also then have Faizon Brandon coming in to join in 2026. So, who knows how this plays out for sure, but that would kind of be my projection going forward, is that Tennessee will be really deep at the position in 2025. But then in addition to perhaps Nico moving on to the NFL at that point, depending on how his college career goes, that Tennessee may lose in 2026, either Merklinger or McIntyre to the portal, with the one stays, and then you also have the arrival of Faizon Brandon.
Well, and all these scenarios make it very important that these guys impress coaches behind the scenes as they're the number 2 or the number 3 quarterback. Like, I think Jake Merklinger should probably try to mimic Gaston Moore as much as Nico this year, because Gaston Moore, who came here as a walk-on, he's a backup. I mean, all the compliments about Gaston Moore is he knows the offense inside and out, great practice habits, knows exactly where the ball is supposed to go. And Jake Merklinger, if he can pick up those traits athletically, he's better than Gaston Moore. And so he can, I think Jake Merklinger could maybe be a little bit more like some of those really good productive quarterbacks that Josh Heupel had at UCF, like a Dylan Gabriel. And if that's what you get, then great. That's not Nico, but that's also a really productive quarterback that could put up a lot of yards. George McIntyre is like a 6'5", who knows, maybe 6'6". He's a really tall dude. He could be a guy that would be a pocket passer that could sling it down the field, that would not be mobile, I think, as Merklinger. So like a different guy. Faizon Brandon, when he gets here, he's sort of a Hendon Hooker type. 6'4", almost 200 pounds. I'm sure by the time he gets here, he would be filled out a little more like Hendon was. And so you could get a guy who's really good mobility, but first and foremost is a pocket passer. And so, I think, you could have your options there. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think when Josh Heupel gets a quarterback, first of all, he wants a guy who could drop back in a pocket and throw the ball accurately and with plenty of zip on it. But he also wants that quarterback to be able to run. He might not want him carrying the ball 20 times a game, but he wants a guy that can run. And that's why I think when you look at it right now, Nico's like the prototype for this offense. Even though he's only started one game, when we see what he can do, he's a perfect fit for the offense. It'll be interesting what you say about Merklinger, Adam, is they talked about in the offseason how diligent he was about preparing and how he really dove into that playbook. And if he's a quick study, I guess it's possible that, heaven forbid, Nico was injured at midseason, that Merklinger would have a shot at the starting job. That's not out of the question, even though Gaston Moore knows the offense inside out. And certainly to begin the season, he's a number 2 guy. But if he comes on strong, and if he is a little bigger and that more athletic, perhaps he could, in that scenario, he could be the quarterback. Yeah,
I mean, I think it brings up sort of an interesting scenario with how Merklinger develops this year, because, if Nico were to have some kind of minor injury, Gaston Moore would be the backup. He would be the guy that would go in the game. He would finish a game. If he had to start the next game, he would be that guy. If an injury happened late in the year, it would be Gaston Moore that would take over for Nico. Now, if it was a catastrophic injury, and all Vol fans knock on wood as I say this, if it were a serious injury, let's say early in the year, Gaston Moore would be the guy immediately, but then Jake Merklinger would get a chance to take over as the number 2. Right now, Gaston Moore is ahead of him in camp. That's for certain. But over time, you could see that change a little bit. But Merklinger needs to make the most of this year so that he can at least make a case to be a stable backup next year for Nico.
Let's finish with some final thoughts on Faizon Brandon. Adam, I know you were kind of breaking him down a little bit, the 5-star number 1 overall prospect that's committed to this 2026 class. Give us an overview. Who are the other finalists in the running for him? And I know you were making some quarterback comps. I realize he's still early in his career. He's got to finish up high school yet. But do you see some additional comparisons as you think of previous SEC quarterbacks that we've seen in the last handful of years?
Yeah, I mean, the guy he's compared to is Hendon Hooker, and I know that's really close to home, but it rings true because his size is similar. He's 6'4", 190 something. Hendon was 6'4", 220 by the time he left here. His skill set is similar. He's a pocket passer, has a good release, but also he's mobile enough. Like, he can run, but he's first and foremost a pocket passer. It's guys like that. It's any guys that you would say is a dual threat quarterback, but don't think that means he's a running quarterback. He's a dual threat in that he can run, but that's not what he primarily does, which is that's what Nico is. Nico is an NFL passer who also can tuck it and go. Just a different body type, I think, between Faizon and Nico.
And the other finalist in the running for him?
Alabama, LSU, NC State. He's from North Carolina, so NC State was in the running. LSU, Alabama. So you've got the questions there with Kalen DeBoer. Like, is he, is that going to be as good as Alabama has been? I think Brian Kelly was. I mean, it was a good competitor to get him. But that's another one where Tennessee's NIL collective has a reputation of being more stable than schools like LSU, which is changed some things up to try to get their collective top notch here recently. So a lot of elements working there together, and Josh Heupel selling Tennessee and game days and all that, plus NIL packages, the quarterback train that they've got going now. All those convinced Faizon Brandon. Now they have to hold him, and they have to win. Like, Tennessee can't be mediocre and keep him. They have to win at a high level.
I think the competition is really stiff just in the SEC alone for quarterbacks, because when you look at some of the coaches, Josh Heupel is not the only guy with a great offensive reputation. You've got Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. You've got Steve Sarkisian at Texas and Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. Those guys are, when you talk about college football and about offensive coaches, those coaches all come to mind. And I would think by now all of those programs have good NIL deals in place. So the competition will be stiff. So that, I think it's even more impressive that Tennessee could sign Faizon. When you consider the competition right now, and it's not as though like McIntyre is an in-state product.
Yeah, and I mean, you just look at the number one prospects these next couple of years. Bryce Underwood is the number one overall prospect in the 2025 class. He's a quarterback out of Michigan. He's committed to LSU. And then now Faizon Brandon, the number one overall prospect in the 2026 class, committed to Tennessee from the state of North Carolina. These are guys, they're committing to SEC schools that aren't 20 miles down the road. I mean, North Carolina, obviously Tennessee has an ability to go into that state and get some prospects, but it's not as if these top prospects are given hometown schools the nod. They are traveling to play in the SEC, as has always been the case. But I think as you look at the recruiting rankings, as you look at some of the top powers in the NIL space, I mean, I think the table and the deck starts to tilt even more heavily in the SEC's favor.
Well, and a lot of this recruiting now has turned into more of what basketball has been for a while. The 7-on-7 tournaments that they have, these are not like small towns. They're very regional. They're over several states. So recruits can play in one state and have a connection to 2 or 3 other bordering states and not be tied into, I have to play for my state university. And then, it's 12-team playoff now. The Big Ten is now in California and Oregon. The SEC is now in Texas and Oklahoma. There's just more of a broader vision of where you can play and it be normal for a lot of these guys. And they were very fortunate to get George McIntyre out of Tennessee, but you can go a lot of places and get a lot of players, and Tennessee's capitalizing on that.
All right, well, that 2025 class continues to take shape as Tennessee probably looks for a few finishing pieces on that class in the next 4 months towards signing day. And you can find all the coverage of that recruiting class and on Faizon Brandon's commitment over at knoxnews.com. And thanks for listening to this edition of the Volunteer State. We'll be back with you next week.